and this does not derive exclusively from Freemasonry. You'll also hear this from there's a leadership teacher by the name of John C. Maxwell, and this notion that real power resides in what you can do to help lift up and build up others, and it dovetails with our concepts in Freemasonry. So I firmly believe that the most important way I can manifest my skills and abilities is what I can do to help build up other people.
Yeah, I love that, man. And I think when we were talking about earlier about one of our responsibilities as men is to help men and build up other men that are in spaces similar to us. I think that's like a direct, alignment with that. So I think what we're gonna cover today is the Freemasonry and how it helps maybe with the personal growth and self-improvement space. You hear a lot of I don't know, it just has Freemasonry has this there's a spectrum of what people think when they hear the word. And so I'm really curious to see what we get into today. But if you want to start by just telling us who you are, what you do, anything you want to say to preface the conversation, and then we can go from there.
Sure. My name is Austin Shifrin. Fairly ordinary fella. I grew up in New York City, but I moved to Pittsburgh back in 1993 to go to college. I'm a fellow with an ordinary day job. I've got a girlfriend. We have a house. We've got 2 cats. But I've also been a member of the Freemasons here in Pennsylvania since 2006. Got pretty actively involved in it pretty quickly. Have served in various different leadership positions. And since about 2014, I started writing for a local magazine. So in more recent times, about 3 years ago now, I published a book that was a collection of some of my articles and a history presentation that I've done about branches of the organization as well. I travel to speak at different branches of the organization where, different subsets of the membership gather. So I've gotten pretty deeply and broadly involved in the organization and acquired a certain comfort level with explaining to people who we are, what we do, what we're all about.
Okay, nice. So, all right, so Freemasonry, is there are there certain sort of maybe core guidelines or values or something that sort of motivates the direction for an individual in the I guess first of all, what is this? Is this a society? Is that what it's referred to? A society?
I mean it's often also referred to as a fraternity.
Okay.
In the mainstream of Freemasonry, it is exclusive to males, so there's a rationale behind referring to it as a fraternity. There are other variants on the organization, other different lineages where they are either co-ed or women only. But you can refer to it. It's been referred to, under a lot. It's had a lot of different labels slapped on it, right? Is it a club? Is it an organization? Is it a fraternity? It's kind of all of those things.
This episode is brought to you by Excel Coaching Academy. Hey guys, I'm really excited to let you know that I started a mindset coaching business. So what I want to do with this business is I want to help entrepreneurs, business owners, salespeople, leaders, and fitness enthusiasts or athletes develop the right mindset to increase revenue, improve business or performance, and overcome the challenges needed to become the best version of themselves. You can get more information about this by emailing info@excelcoaching.academy. Okay. So I guess we'll say fraternity for this conversation, or whatever comes to mind at the moment. So is there you hear a lot of these things, there's a guiding, maybe 6 guiding principles or something that you sort of work towards while in the the organization or whatever. Is there something that sort of motivates a direction for an individual, I guess would be the question?
Yeah. And it's funny because that kind of distillation of principles can be important in a lot of different ways, right? It can be important sometimes if you're trying to market an organization. But what is a simple way to get this idea across? Can you make an elevator speech about it? I think that there are some core premises or principles of Freemasonry. Sometimes the easiest thing to point back to is what are the requirements for membership? it admits, men of a certain minimum age, right, which differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And the fact that that's separate and distinct, I can kind of explain a little bit better as our conversation goes on. But a man of a certain minimum age, person has to be of good character, right? You have to be of good character and reputation. People who already conduct themselves by some set of core principles, hold themselves to some kind of standard.
Okay.
And also, mainstream Freemasonry only admits members who have a belief in a supreme being or a higher power. Now, this usually is exclusive to monotheists, but that's still also a pretty broad tent, right? And that means this is an organization where, just as a for instance, men who are Jewish, Christian, or Muslim can sit down together and focus on our common ground rather than our differences. I know that many people believe that in today's modern age, that's something that we could use a lot more of. People trying to learn ways to get along and live in harmony.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that was going to be a question I asked about the belief in the higher power, because that's something I've heard before. And, I think if you're a part of a group or an organization or a society, a culture, a fraternity, whatever it is, I think the guiding principles for that would be helpful to the individual, I guess, depending on the purpose of why they're there. But I think if a person has a belief in a higher power, I think that is probably, no pun intended, but that's like the supreme, sort of core values for a person or direction for a person. Because I feel like the respect and fear and admiration for a higher power, I don't know that there's anything else that can guide us better than that. Because there's just, there's the humility aspect of it, there's the respect aspect of it, there's the fear aspect of it. And I think that if we have if that's sort of our belief system is set on that, something that's much higher than us, much more, an omniscient being that sort of created everything around us that we answer to in one way or the other. I think that really directs us, our lives, if we allow it to, in a positive direction. Now, some people might come back with that and say, well, there's been a lot of wars fought in the name of religion. I understand that. But I think religion as a system or as a culture is different from belief in a higher power. Like, I think religion is like the worldly aspect of it. I think the belief in the higher power comes from the individual.
You're getting into some very complex territory, but you're also getting at the heart of part of what Freemasonry is all about. So religion is, you might say, is the cultural way that our spirituality manifests, right? So if I believe in a higher power, but the culture that comes from the geographic chunk of the world where I originate says that you pray to him on this day of the week, and you use this language, and you eat these foods in this season, but not these foods in this other season, then that's just the cultural lens through which I approach the practice of my spirituality. And my neighbor might come from a different geographic part of the world. He might speak a different language. He might pray on a different day of the week, face in a different direction. But we might both agree that there's one supreme being. And if we can think about it that way and talk about it that way, we can also stop and focus on what guiding principles might be at the heart of our religions that are more similar to each other than different. The concept of the golden rule predates a lot of world cultures. The notion that we should treat other people the way that we want to be treated is pretty ancient. So Freemasonry is sometimes also referred to as a brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God. And the idea that that could bring together diverse people is a pretty powerful idea.
No, yeah, I bet. Because I don't know, man. I don't know of anything that's more unifying than, we are all sort of, I don't want to say insignificant, because I don't think people are insignificant, but we are basically under a power that is much higher than us. I think there's nothing more unifying than that, because we're separated by, whatever, languages and races and territories and geography and all this other kind of stuff. But like, one thing that we certainly all have in common is that death is inevitable. That's for everybody. And also, if we have that belief that there is something higher than us, I think it does unite us in a way. And it's not that we're, sort of against this thing or anything. It's just that we are all sort of in this together to, I think on a collective level, evolve as individuals. And then I think when we do that as a byproduct, we evolve collectively. Because I think, basically all the collective is the individual doing things on a large enough scale, and that becomes, society, so to speak. So I think the responsibility of being a better society 100% falls on the individual. It's especially like in America, it's easy for us to, since we just came out of an election season and all that, it's easy for us to point fingers at the other side or this person or whatever. But it's like, if everybody sort of does their part, then, on a collective scale, I feel like that's where change happens.
For sure. You brought up a couple of different pretty important points, and two of them that I wanted to tap into in particular is you mentioned something about mortality. And this is something that's always been a component of Masonic thought and Masonic philosophy, that the notion that we may believe in an eternal soul, but there's a physical existence that's got an expiration date on it. Mm-hmm. We're only going to be here on Earth to have a direct personal impact on each other for so long. So if we intentionally force ourselves to confront that reality, then it should also remind us to be, mindful and considerate about what are we going to do with that time that we were alive?
Exactly.
What can we do to be a positive influence? You also said something about this community and communality. And the fact of the matter is that while Freemasonry may consider itself this, brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God, some of these lessons come in baby steps, right? So, as a fraternity, our first kind of level of instruction is reminding us how to treat our brothers in the organization, fellow members. But of course, we are supposed to try over time to learn to extend these principles to everyone around us. And in that way, working on this self-improvement is also going to improve the community. It's going to improve society.
Man, I'm really glad that you bring that up, because I say a lot that, especially in the personal growth, self-improvement space, it's easy to see that as something that's selfish. But if you're doing that the way that you really should be doing it, and you're not doing it for external validation, or you're not doing it for acceptance from some other group or person, or you're not doing it, just for some other temporary thing, if you're doing it in the right way, I think that everybody that is connected to you, whether directly or indirectly, benefits from that, whether that's family. A lot of times in this space, on this podcast, what we talk about is there's a lot of leaders involved, leadership. So that's your team. That's the people that work with you. And I think that if you are evolving that way, whatever that is, professionally or personally, people that are connected to you are going to also, their lives should improve because you are improving your life. I was just talking to a gentleman yesterday, and he has a ministry and we were talking about that, the improvement. So as far as men go, one of our big roles as men is to improve ourselves and then help other men who are in similar situations to us also improve their lives. And I think that's one thing that, I think purpose is important for everybody, but I think especially for men, purpose is extremely important, because I think that men who do not have that purpose are usually down the route of the drugs and the violence and the vices and those kind of things. I mean, I think if you talk to any person who's ever overcome any kind of addiction, what they will tell you is probably, three things, since we're talking about this too. They will tell you that lack of purpose is probably one thing that pushed them in that direction. A purpose, something bigger than them, is probably what brought them out of that, helped them bring out of that. And also what sustained that sobriety was a sense of community. I've heard a lot of people talk about how community, we talk about the AA program with alcohol and things like that. So these things are very important. I think, and I can't speak for women, I'm not sure, because I don't have that experience, but I think for men, I think would be the self-improvement through the community and that purpose, that you're offering your community or the world or your family, whatever it is. I think those things are extremely important for men.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And, I think among the things that you've pointed to, even people who aren't suffering with dependence or addiction benefit from that notion of community and this idea of fellows working together and kind of keeping each other honest, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, if you think about trying to get into any good habit, if you're trying to get into going to the gym, there's going to be mornings that you wake up and it's kind of overcast out and you can see the wind whipping the trees around and you're like, boy, I really don't feel like getting out of bed. But if your buddy texts you and says, hey, I'm meeting you in the gym, at 7:30, let's go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you are reminded and you're encouraged and you're coached along, right?
Mm.
Likewise, if you're trying to eat better, but your spouse isn't, then it's harder to kind of maintain your own discipline, even if some of that should be internal. If all of the other temptations are still sitting around, but if you're both in it together, then you can both encourage each other, and you're both maybe preparing the healthy meal together, and so on and so forth. So there's a saying that I believe originates in the New Testament that iron sharpens iron. If you have a community of men working towards self-improvement, then it's going to be far more effective because people can help reinforce those ideas and practices with each other. But it's interesting because you point to the idea that aimlessness and not necessarily feeling like you already have a purpose or a goal can send people down some negative paths. And I would argue that even fellas who have a pretty steady routine and a pretty buttoned down, straight-laced kind of life, you have a 9-to-5 job, but you might walk out of there at 5 o'clock and still have questions, and say like, so what am I? Like when I'm not in the house being dad, or I'm not in the office being, this bean counter, like what actually am I? And to have a third space where you can explore the more fundamental questions of existence with other men, that's a pretty valuable thing.
Yeah. And man, that's such a good point. Because you say that you don't necessarily, a lack of purpose, that's obviously not an ideal thing, but even having a purpose, I think sometimes does not necessarily mean that possibility just disappears for you.
None of us have it all figured out, right?
Well, and that's exactly it. And there's a book called The Gulag Archipelago by, his name is Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I think is how it's pronounced. And he basically survived the Soviet Union. What was it? The concentration camps that were in the Soviet Union. And he has a quote in there, which I absolutely love. And it says I'm paraphrasing, it's not verbatim, but it says, the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every human being. So like we all have that sort of, I think we have that, it's not ability, but we definitely have the possibility to be good or evil, and we have to choose which one that we're going to be. And I think that also too overlaps with the law of polarity, which is that opposites exist. And I say this a lot, and I think sometimes it's hard for people to really hear what I'm saying when I say this, but it's like your talents, whatever those talents are, they can be great things. If you're good at, if you're charismatic and charming, you can be a great salesperson. But the downside of that is you could also be very manipulative. You could be like bad for people, whatever. So I think that, and I was talking to this, to the gentleman yesterday, JR, that he has the ministry. I was like, whatever your talents are, whatever those positive benefits are from you, there are also the ability to do harm in those. So a very simple example is martial arts. You look at a martial artist. They can protect their family themselves. They can protect everybody in the room if they needed to, if they're skilled at that level. But that's also a talent that, if used in the wrong way, could really hurt somebody when it's not necessary. And so we have to, I think there's this sort of, I think we have to have this self-awareness that like whatever this thing is for you, if you're, like I said, if you're good at, if you're charismatic, you have to use that in the proper way. If you're a big, strong guy, you have to use that in the proper way. If you are, an attractive person and people like to approach you, that's obviously comes with its own things. You have to use that in a certain way. And so I think that when we're talking about God, we talk about the purpose and these talents and these abilities. I think these things are gifts; they're given to us. But I think we have to, be conscious and aware of how we use those out in the world, because they could, with the flip of a switch, they could be a vice instead of a gift.
Now, when you decide to dip your toe into Freemasonry and you become involved, you have these options of joining various different branches. And the different branches have different lessons that they convey to their members. And usually these are referred to as degrees. So, the degree is both an attainment of a milestone, but you attain that milestone by way of absorbing some lesson. And it's interesting, the aspect that you just brought up is very specifically covered in one of the degrees that comes from one of our optional organizations referred to as the Scottish Rite. So I hope that someday someone who is listening to this episode right now will have decided to not only join the regular lodge, which is the starting point for all Freemasonry, but decides to move on and also join this optional organization, the Scottish Rite, because they're going to come back and remember this episode and remember something that I didn't say, that you said just a moment ago about these gifts. Well, if I was given all of these gifts and talents, surely I'm not supposed to now seclude myself and hide away from society. I've got to apply them towards some mission, some goal, some purpose. So was I given a purpose? What am I supposed to go out and do with these gifts that I have? I hope that somebody makes their way through that organization, comes and says to themselves, oh, I remember that the host, Cody, brought this up in this episode and I was listening to it. And now that's coming back to me and that lesson makes sense.
Yeah.
But I didn't say it. You did.
But it's so crazy because that is like, there's a big discussion, especially in the I guess the theology realm or the belief or non-belief. There's a big discussion about free will, and it's like that is the epitome of free will. Like you have these things, you have these talents. Are you going to use them for good or bad? Because there's obviously been people in history who have used their charismatic approach for bad, to enslave people or manipulate mass groups of people or whatever.
Sure.
And it's just like, what like, I don't know, who knows what it was that motivated that, but it's like, if you can take that and use it in an empowering way. And so we're talking about self-improvement. We're talking about improving your life, the people around you. I mean, dude, who knows how different the world would be if everybody just sort of took their own thing and applied it out to the world.
For sure.
But then, of course, that conversation opens up the I guess the confidence or the self belief that they can do that.
You said something about this before. You mentioned something about humility, and it reminded me of a story about a rabbi. And I'm forgetting the specific rabbi's name right now, but I actually mentioned it in one of my books. So if I was smart, I'd have that reference bookmarked already. And he said that you should always walk around carrying 2 slips of paper, one in one pocket on your one side and one in the other side pocket. And the note in the one pocket should say, I am, dust and nothingness, and one day I'm going to return to dust and nothingness. And the note in the other pocket is going to say, the universe was created for me. And every now and then, we all need like one of those reminders or the other.
Right.
Like sometimes we need to be taken down a notch a little bit. And other times we need somebody to remind us, hey, you know what? You are something important. You're something special, and you have something to give.
It's a good point. That's a good point. But I think what a lot of this stuff comes down to is, I think it is balance. I think balance is important, because like we talked about with the martial arts example, I mean, hopefully a person that knows those skills, maybe they use them in sport, which obviously there's parameters, there's safety and all that involved. Hopefully that never has to be used in the real world, because if it is, that means something really dangerous is going on. But it's like, there's a balance of it. I mean, there's obviously, like, one thing that I love about martial arts, man, is like it teaches you, and I say this a lot, but it teaches you how to take a loss. It teaches you that losing is okay. And it also lets you learn from your losses. And that is obviously a very big lesson that can be applied to every, different areas of life. But it's like you have that balance of, what's the phrase that I think Jordan Peterson says, being a good man is not a harmless man. A good man is a very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control. And that's not just in the martial arts space. I was talking to someone yesterday. She helps victims. She calls it survivors of narcissistic abuse. And before I had that conversation with her, I was thinking, well, narcissist is loud, they're aggressive, they're, whatever. But it turns out different forms of narcissism, like sometimes they use financial manipulation, sometimes they use emotional, sometimes there's obviously a physical aspect involved, reputation destruction, all those kind of things. And so, it's not just that there's the physical aspect of it, but I think Jordan Peterson was exactly right when he said a person who has the ability to do harm and chooses to do good or use that ability for good, I do think that is what makes a person a good person.
Absolutely. I mean, and not only that, but a moment ago you were also bringing up martial arts, and I think it's easy, from the outside to have a misconception about what it means to go take martial arts lessons, because naturally you're hoping to learn different disciplines, different exercises, and different movements that you can utilize in some form of combat. But a lot of people who take martial arts will tell you that one of the things that they did not expect when they got engaged in it was that it taught them lessons that they could take outside of that classroom and apply in other areas of their life that had nothing to do with combat or sport. And that's, just to drag it back to my pet topic, that is an important component of what Freemasonry is supposed to be about. There are things that we learn in the privacy of that lodge, in the secrecy of that lodge. And there are things that we're supposed to memorize. But that's not even remotely enough, because mainly what we're learning, if these are lessons in civics and ethics and morals and behavior, we have to then take those out into the world and act on.
Yeah, that's the thing, man, is the action. Martial arts is just such a simple example, because so first of all, if somebody practices martial arts, I think parents have a fear that if they put their children in martial arts, they're going to turn out to be bullies or whatever. And the exact opposite is true. Exactly the opposite is true. You're actually less likely to engage in physical alteration if you know martial arts, because you don't feel the need to prove yourself to anything. And also you have the confidence, which is usually what de-escalates bully situations, is just simple confidence. Because those people, the bullies, obviously thrive on people who are not confident to defend themselves. But yeah, you're talking about Freemasonry and the like learning the lesson and the application to the real world. And I think it's really hard to express the value of that sort of environment, because I don't think a lot of men have that. A lot of men don't have, there's a, I guess you would say, a widespread sort of issue with absent fathers in the home in this time, and a lot of men don't have that guidance. And not to get off on a political tangent here, but I think a lot of this sort of improvement or self-improvement for men, or sort of support for men, is for some reason lacking in the culture that we live in today. We have, there's just like it seems like there's a mass confusion on, and we were talking about this yesterday about the ministry. It seems like there's a mass confusion on what we're even supposed to do here as men. You see, it's almost like,
without question, there's a vacuum, right? There's a gap. And I think it's also okay to say, it's okay if you want to say that it's possible that what's the right definition of being a man or being masculine for me might not be the same as it was for my dad or my granddad.
Right.
So to have a space where men get together only with other men to talk a little bit about the shifting landscape, what it means to them, what they can do, how they can respond to it, and what's really, of value and important versus what things are we doing just because we were told that's what men do, right? So, if that landscape is shifting, and if some men are going to cook for their family and stay home and take care of children, then that there's nothing inherently immoral about that, even if it differs from the guy one house down the block or one guy across the street. But all three of those guys can get together and talk about it and open up in a space where they might feel a little bit vulnerable because of the uncertainty that they're experiencing, but around these men who you've promised to have their back and to respect them and to give them their dignity, we can all open up and say, I feel a little bit strange and uncertain about what my role is, how to live out the mandate of being a provider or whatever else it represents to me. And we can bounce those ideas off of each other in what you might refer to as a safe space.
Yeah. Well, I think if those conversations are going to be had, I think something like the Brotherhood of the Freemasonry, I think that is the place to have that. Because I think that if you are surrounded by men who are on a similar mission to you, like we were talking about earlier, I think that is one of the best ways to improve as men. I think the problem and this, I'm not picking on women, I'm not picking on men, but I think the problem is these days, especially in the dating space, you have one side saying this about the other side saying this, and it's just back and forth thing. And there's like very little of, men helping men with this and women helping women with this. And let's just kind of, balance the two out. And I think if we just did that, which sounds like a very simple solution, sounds like the obvious solution to me. But you mentioned something about how a man's sort of what that means might be different for each man. I think, honestly, I think it comes down to are the people around you, your family, or your circle, your inner circle, is their life easy or difficult because of what you do as a man? I mean, I think it's as simple as that. And that obviously is very different for every person. And I think that has to be, when you talk about the man and the woman, the roles or whatever, I think that has to be unique to their relationship. But I think that's my exact point, because the problem is we have these, like, there's these expectations where it's supposed to be this way. And then when you have that expectation on society as a whole, it's like, well, not every relationship is going to fit into that. And then if you are sort of forced into that, you're not going to be your authentic self. And I don't know what's more important in an intimate relationship than authenticity,
And, it's so funny because when that becomes a factor or a dynamic in our relationships, it can sometimes undermine things, and we don't even realize that it's happening. We have blind spots for what kind of expectations we're trying to live up to. We don't even know where we absorbed them from. Was it from reading Archie comics? Was it just one offhanded comment that your dad said when you told him that you wanted to do XYZ as an extracurricular activity? But once we absorb those lessons, we run the risk of taking our hangups out on other people without even realizing that we're doing it. Now, you mentioned something about a mental health practitioner and talking about narcissism as a disorder. And coincidentally, my girlfriend is a therapist, and that's among the places that she focuses on. And it's odd how the harms that we suffer as kids can become like a splint that shapes our development as we grow. And then, like I said, at the risk of being a little repetitive, we might take these hangups out on other people without realizing that we're doing it because of expectations that were placed on us earlier. Now, many women may agree with me that more men should be in therapy. But I might be using that phrase too glibly. Men could take advantage of therapy. The fact of the matter is that taking care of your own mental health, we could look at it a lot more like we take care of our physical health. You go to a doctor checkup every year, or after a certain age, you get other stuff checked up on a regular basis as well. Not because you're trying to keep somebody else happy, but because it's the right thing to do as a step of maintenance to take good care of yourself. Well, we could stand to treat our mental health a little bit more like we treat our physical health. But I know that many men, feel compelled to be more sturdy and self-reliant, and maybe don't want to open up in that way. And I would never advocate for the Masonic Lodge as being a substitute for having a good therapist. But in terms of helping you feel a sense of community and find a safe space where there are people that you should be able to trust and be comfortable around, that you can then open up and say, I'm struggling with something, I'm having a hard time. This is also a good place to find that kind of support.
Man, and I love that you mentioned that, because I think therapy has its place. I think that, I think a lot of, most people could probably benefit to some degree of some sort of therapy. But I think as men, a lot of what we think therapy would fix could be fixed with lifestyle changes, with a sense of direction, a sense of purpose, a sense of a higher calling, pursuing that thing. And also, like you just mentioned, a sense of community. I think whether that's Brotherhood or people that are around us, I think a lot of, sort of, and I do believe that depression is a real thing. I do believe that, but I think a lot of what people think depression would be not cured, eliminated or alleviated with these lifestyle changes. or at the very least, like, let's try that first before we go and we go the pharmaceutical route, because I think that should be your last, your last resort. Now that's just me personally. I'm not a therapist. I can't maybe comment on that, but I do think a lot of these things would be fixed for us, if we did the lifestyle stuff first. Because I don't know, I think not to get off on another tangent. I think a lot of this stuff is overprescribed, man. Like, there's a widespread sort of concern right now with parents and younger children, especially boys, who are being overprescribed like ADHD medication or whatever. And it's like, how much of that is actual ADHD and how much of that is, a 10-year-old boy being a 10-year-old boy? They're sitting in a desk for 8 hours a day. And I don't know about when you were a kid, but when I was a kid, like, that was just like a form of torture almost. So, we wanted to be running around and doing things. And that, that goes off into the education system, which obviously needs some restructuring there. But yeah, I think you're right. I think I think that sort of place for men, I think, is important for us. And I know you're not saying that Freemasonry is a substitute for that, but I think some sort of brotherhood or community, I think, is really important for men.
It's funny. I mean, I can remember this really going back to when I was in college, is that, it's like you've got your literal family, which is, your blood relations. And then you've got sort of like family by choice, like the people that you kind of accumulate over the course of your life, and you have a real bond with, a real fabric with, and a real trust with them, and that's people that the family that you kind of create by choice. And when I came to college, I didn't necessarily understand the concept of that brotherhood the way that I saw it, like in Greek fraternities, like on a college campus. But I understood the concept in terms of the people that you meet in your youth, and you realize you're going to strike up relationships and form this bond with them, and kind of stick together in some way, shape, or form throughout the rest of your life. That family of choice that you form, And one of the interesting things about the Masonic iteration of this is that you are given this opportunity to forge these relationships with people that you have some things in common with and some things on which you're very dissimilar. And that's a pretty special opportunity, because there are a lot of circumstances in life that put us only in close proximity with people with whom we already have a bunch in common. You're going to go sit in church with somebody that you've already got your religion in common with. You're going to walk in and out of your job and grab happy hour or grab lunch with people that you've already got a career background in common with. But you're going to go to lodge with guys of different ages, with different types of jobs, who had different kinds of upbringings, and that's going to give you this opportunity to expand your mind in ways that you might not have otherwise in other sectors of your life.
Yeah, man, that's really, really powerful. I think you mentioned the word, we were talking about community, and you mentioned the word commonality earlier. And I think just because you're in common with people does not mean you're in a community with people, and I think that's a very good way to put it. I was talking to somebody and I mentioned that, if you have this belief system and you never sort of explore outside of this belief system, and you continue to have that belief system, then do you really have that belief system? And I'm not saying to go and test your beliefs, but if you can't, I feel like if you don't have the open mind to at least say, okay, well, this is a possible way to look at this in a different way. I don't know that, I mean, do you really have your beliefs, or are you just sort of enforcing what you've always been told? And I think there's no better way to see multiple sides of beliefs than through like different cultures, different people, different walks of life. And so it's encouraging that that Freemasonry has that sort of diverse group of people in it, because I think that's what community is.
For sure. I've long felt that that's one of the great benefits of the organization.
Yeah. Man, I just want to say, like, we are blending this thing beautifully. Like, I love how this conversation is going, because we're talking about the Freemasonry, and we're blending it very well with, I feel like, the self-improvement, personal growth. It sounds like there's a lot of overlap. And I didn't really anticipate that. So that's encouraging. So I do want to ask you this. If there was something that maybe a lot of people don't really know about Freemasonry that you wish people did know, or more people knew, what do you think that would be?
it's difficult because I've got more than one answer to that question. So for a good chunk of the population, the answer I might give is just that we actually exist in the present day.
Okay.
It's not a historical artifact that you find behind glass someplace and you go, this is a thing that people used to do. Like, as it turns out, we're all over the US doing stuff right now. And
Okay.
I can say that in part because I think of it as being so ubiquitous because I'm a member. If I go, drive through another town or, I'm looking stuff up online because I know it already exists. I've got an eyesight for it, and it doesn't evade my notice. So like, as I'm driving down the road, I'm looking for a signpost on the side of the road or a decal on somebody's car. But I also know that there's a big cross section of the general public where there isn't even an awareness that we're a present day phenomenon. They think that we're some dinosaur preserved in amber somewhere, right? This is thought number one. Thought number two is, if there was a single thing I would want people to know, is that Freemasonry is a lot less spooky than some people assume it to be. If I was going to draw an analogy, it's kind of, and some people would resent me for saying this, but it's kind of almost like Boy Scouts for adults, right? So like, there's something very down to earth about it. There's something very, it's got a patriotic thread. It's got a mom and apple pie kind of vibe, very Norman Rockwell. And I think that there are people who, observing it from the outside, have fears or concerns that come from a lack of knowledge and sort of filling in the blanks on their own. But in fact, it's a much more down to earth kind of organization than people might even expect.
Well, I think it's almost inevitable to have a conversation about Freemasonry without sort of the acknowledgement of there's a portion of people that sort of connect. I don't know about like conspiracies and like certain individuals in the organization or some sort of attached to these things. And I just feel like the likelihood that an organization as a whole exists for that reason or is partaking in something like that, I think is just very, very low. I don't think that, because at that point it would probably be a criminal organization.
Yep.
I mean, it'd be like an outlaw gang or whatever, So, but on the other hand, I think that within any organization, any group of people, there are probably going to be a small number of people who don't make wise choices. And if they're affiliated with some sort of group, then of course, that gets known and the group gets sort of not blamed, but they get a bad name.
I mean, unfortunately, for sure, like any organization, I hate trotting out this old saying, but any organization has bad apples, right?
Right.
For sure.
Right.
Now it's interesting and ironic because like dating back hundreds of years to the origins of Freemasonry, one principle that was stuck by pretty staunchly was that they never wanted the members to reflect poorly back on the rest of the organization. So the organization said, we have valuable and important things to teach you. And what we don't want is for you to walk out into the community and cause a public impression that results in people saying, "Oh, those Freemasons, they can't be trusted," and they're people who will try to cheat you or do X, Y, or Z. So as a result of which, there is a pretty firm and consistent practice of not tolerating that kind of behavior or expelling people when any kind of misbehavior can be proven. I think there's a misconception because Freemasons do make a variety of promises to have each other's back that somehow implies that misbehavior is going to be tolerated. It is not.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I think like on the, I guess the bigger picture, like the fraternity or the group as a whole, I don't really see like these sort of things being accepted. And like I said, man, this just the broad, I don't know how many members there are, how many people there are in this thing, but the likelihood that this is a systemic thing within the organization, I just don't see that to be the case because like I said, there would be some sort of it would be essentially be an outlawed thing, like a criminal gang or something. At
Yeah,
that
I
point.
mean, it's much in the same sense as like if nowadays you actually see this phenomenon happen, right? Somebody works for a large corporation, and it comes to light that they're misbehaving on social media, and
Yep.
somebody says, "Hey, I found out that this Ralph Jones, made up name. I'm just this is a hypothetical made up person. This Ralph Jones went out on social media and said these nasty bigoted things." And the word gets back to the corporation, and the corporation's like, well, we don't want our reputation associated with this individual who's creating this negative public impression. And there's a chance that individual is going to get let go from their job. And I think the same dynamic exists within Freemasonry, that rather than it nurturing criminal behavior, it has a firm, consistent, and strong desire to disassociate itself with that kind of negativity.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense because, like I said, it seems like, and I know there's maybe no written values or sort of written structure for what a person should uphold in the organization, but it does seem like that sense of integrity and authenticity and being a respectable individual. It does seem like that's something that's, I don't want to say required, but at the very least, like it seems to be something that people in that space they have those traits, maybe.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm necessarily quoting something verbatim, but among the criteria that are requisite before a person can even pursue membership, and this may sound very general, but a certain uprightness and a certain positive character are necessary. So it's an organization that has a motto that says it takes good men and makes them better. Well, it doesn't say that it's starting from scratch. It takes good men and makes them better.
Yeah. So other than like the brotherhood, the community, that kind of thing, when you say takes good men and makes them better, is that just through maybe like what we talked about earlier, the leadership from people in that space? I mean, I guess that's kind of what I was asking earlier about, are there core values or is there sort of like a system that a person should uphold in the organization?
Yep. So this is exactly where the rubber hits the road, and it's kind of a subject matter that you and I hit on much earlier in this conversation. So each of the different degrees that are conferred on incoming candidates, or even some of the different roles of officers who are involved in helping support, organize, and run the lodge, involve these lectures. There's a lot of memorized stuff to be recited. And those lectures usually involve guidelines and principles about how people should conduct themselves, behave, think about their relationship to each other, think about their relationship to that higher power. Now, it is well and good to say that someone has successfully memorized these lectures, and they'll be respected and appreciated for those accomplishments. Even whether they're the people responsible for delivering them, or even somebody who's just on the sidelines who says, yes, I have heard this so many times, I have now actually memorized it. But the question is, have you taken it to heart? So I can't say that Freemasonry takes good men and makes them better by way of like waving a magic wand at them. But what it does do is expose them to these lessons. Now you have a responsibility to meet the lodge halfway, to take those lessons, go out and act on them.
Okay. Is there
Oh, you know what? Forgive me. I apologize for interrupting you. But the same could be said of various organized religions. If you're a regular attender at church, a regular attender at your synagogue or your mosque, it's going to expose you to many wholesome and valuable lessons. And you might even, get patted on the shoulder for memorizing them and being able to quote them at other people. But then there's the question of, did you take those lessons to heart? Did you go out and act?
Okay. So and I'm assuming we're sort of approaching a place here that we can't really get in too much detail about, either for sake of brevity or because of, some other prior I guess, obligation or something on your end when we say these lessons? Because it seems like we're being vague here, and I don't know if this is intentional or it's just for the sake of brevity, maybe for just for time.
Yeah, maybe slightly. The fact I can give you some logistics about how a person gets involved in this organization.
Yeah, because
But
not to interrupt, but what I was leading up to, like a person, the ideal person who maybe might benefit from the organization was the reason for asking that. I mean, and I know it sounds like, maybe all men could benefit from this, but is there like a specific person when you say try to make these people better men through these lessons? I'm just trying to figure out like where would be an ideal starting point for someone that wanted to, get in, learn these lessons, and be better people,
so
be a better man.
trying to think this through out loud for a moment, if we picture a man who, whether he's single, in a relationship, married, has started to get his foothold in the world, right? He's economically at least stable. He's got a job, he's got a place, he's got a routine, he's got a life, but he's thinking about meaning, right? He's thinking about purpose, and he's thinking about how does he fit into this big picture of the universe, right? But like you said, he's also trying to strike a balance, because if you could find yourself spiraling deeply into philosophy. If I had the time to just spend all day sitting and thinking, I might find that very enriching too, but I can't, because I got to get out and make a living. So now you've got your daily grind, your daily routine, and you just feel like there's got to be more to life than this. And you don't have zero religious or spiritual background. You grew up in something, you came from something. You still go to services, you are part of that community. But you don't know whether you're getting the whole picture. And you want to know what is out there. Is there more to learn? This is an avenue that you might pursue. If you say to yourself, I believe I'm a decent person, but it matters to me, I care about it, and I wonder whether there's more work I could perform on myself, whether I could be even more squared away, as it were, right? How will I accomplish that, though? Where will I look? If I walk into Barnes & Noble, I'm going to find a whole wall of self-help books, but maybe I don't want to just take this book home and sit on the couch alone by myself and read it. Maybe I want to be a part of something, a part of a community that's all working towards improving themselves. Well,
okay,
that's why you stumbled across this podcast and these two particular guys hashing it out for a little while, talking about what it all means.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to phrase that. So it sounds like a person who might benefit. I say benefit, loosely, but a person who might be at the place where something like they're in the place to accept something like this. Because I'm sure that the acceptance of this message and of this sort of these lessons are a huge thing. You can't help a person who's not ready to help themselves. So I'm assuming that a person. Yeah. So I'm assuming a person has to be sort of, somewhat in that place to be receptive of that.
Yep.
Would make sense to that.
Once they take those first tentative steps into Freemasonry, they're even going to find it gets explicitly discussed that what we're hoping to avoid is somebody who stumbled across our doorway just out of curiosity or because somebody else badgered them into it. That's not the kind of candidate we're looking for. We're looking for somebody who is literally a seeker.
Well, it seems like something like with Freemasonry, there's like a dedication to it that a person, you can't really instill into a person. And so I don't know if this was one thing I was going to ask you, if a person wants to. So my understanding is that you do not join Freemasonry. It's almost like you have to be approached. At least that's my understanding of it. Somebody has to come to you with
the funny thing is it's the opposite.
Okay.
I understand why you've come to that impression, because it's always carried a reputation of being a very selective organization. So it would be reasonable to assume that the members of Freemasonry were peering around, trying to find just the right guys, and saying, you are the chosen one. Please come over here. I have something to talk to you about. Historically, it's literally the opposite that's been true, because like I said, since we were trying to ensure that nobody was joining only because they felt pressured into doing so, it was literally forbidden to solicit new members. They had to approach somebody who at least they believed was a Freemason and say, I feel a real need to know more about this. I think I should join. Can you tell me? Can you help me in this endeavor? That's morphed and evolved a little bit over time. It is also different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. In the US, that means from state to state. Requirements are a little bit different. But ultimately, in most places in the US, it is now permitted for people who are existing members to identify somebody in their social circle that they think would be a good fit and at least broach a conversation with them and say, hey, I'm a member of this thing. I love it. I've been involved for X number of years. I feel like it's an enriching experience. I think it's something that might benefit you too, and that you also might benefit the organization. Would you like to have more of a conversation about this?
Okay. So I guess so if a person's interested in doing this, they find someone who is a Freemason, they maybe approach them. But I'm assuming that there's got to be some sort of selection process, like, right, to become a Freemason, you have to, I'm assuming, go through some sort of process to be, I don't want to say selected, but maybe qualify, let's say.
Yep. Yes, there is. So again, with the caveat that this varies a little bit from state to state, but there's some consistency. The person who has started that conversation, their friend who is already a member hands them a form. Any place else in the world, you'd call this an application. In Freemasonry, we call it a petition. The person fills that out with some details about themselves. The friend then brings they put a signature on it, vouching for this person who has just applied. And it needs to be vouched by one other person, one other existing member as well.
Okay.
This petition gets taken into a lodge, and an assignment is given to a committee to come visit that guy at his home, have a little bit further conversation, suss out whether the organization is right for him and whether he is right for the organization. Not only to ask him questions, but also to permit him to ask them questions. This is also supposed to help ensure that the perspective from which he's heard about Freemasonry is not only from the first original point of contact, but now he's had an opportunity to bounce some of these questions and ideas off of some other people as well. That committee is going to come back to the lodge and report back whether or not they thought this fella was a good fit. Then on top of that, there's going to be a vote. If someone in that room, or enough people in that room, depending on their voting system, is aware of some very significant shortcoming or defect of that man, he may get voted down. So in spite of the fact that this process has already gone a little bit ways along, that person could be rejected.
Okay.
However, if the vote goes in his favor, he's going to get either a letter or some other form of communication from the lodge saying that he has passed these steps and inviting him to show up on a specific evening to receive his first degree.
Okay. And the reason I asked that is because, somebody, may hear and be interested in that. So I don't know, is there a way for a person to just go online and look at lodges that are near them? Because like I said, there may be who knows who.
We have been dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century. In most states in the U.S., your Grand Lodge, the body that governs Freemasonry for your state, will have a decent website. And that website will include two things. It will include something called a lodge locator. It's a little bit like your Apple Maps or your Google Maps. You can give it a zip code or a town name, and it can tell you the closest lodges in proximity to that area. And that website hopefully will also include either a form to fill out for contact, or at the very least an email that you can reach out to initiate this conversation, so that you may not be directly contacting that most nearby lodge by using this form, but you'll be reaching out to an individual who'll be able to route you to one of those lodges.
Okay.
So we have started to embrace technology. Thank goodness. And the thing is, it's resulted in an odd dynamic, because the old-fashioned way meant that if you joined the lodge nearest to your home or your office, you were also joining by way of a friend, or at least a reasonable acquaintance who had introduced you into this, and could therefore also help facilitate those social connections between you and the other membership of the lodge. We do have people arriving on our doorstep now, if you'll excuse me using that phrase for it, who have come via this electronic route, but didn't already have an established friendship or relationship with the people who are quote unquote bringing them in. As a result of which, we've had to cultivate better mentoring systems, better systems to help integrate these new members and make them feel at home in that lodge and feel a sense of ownership of that lodge. So we're taking steps to work with the new systems and paradigms that exist in this wild, electronic, futuristic world, and try to, like you said, strike a balance between what's modern and what's ancient.
So just a couple things to ask you before we close out here. And this is just to whatever degree you're comfortable, answering this question. But how do you think that your life is better because of being in the Freemasons, in the Brotherhood, in the sort of fraternity? How do you think your life is better than maybe what it would have been?
This is going to sound. This might sound almost trivial, but it's not in the way that I mean it. It's like heartfelt and sincere. I put down my roots so much deeper and broader in the Pittsburgh area by virtue of my membership in this organization than ever could have been remotely possible without it. So remember, I didn't grow up in the Pittsburgh area. I grew up in Manhattan, in New York City. But decades later, I joined this organization, and because I was very enthusiastic right from the get-go, I was told that among the rights and privileges that I attained by full membership was that I could visit other lodges. And in fact, there was a visitation schedule that said that this person who's the liaison from my lodge and other lodges in our sort of surrounding neighborhood, 10 or so of them, the liaison from this group of lodges up to Grand Lodge, he has a tour schedule where he visits all of the lodges. And people from all of the lodges in this surrounding district or neighborhood are supposed to accompany him. And I said, well, that sounds like fun. But this is before we had GPS, before we had, Apple Maps and, a GPS mounted on the dashboard of every car. I was printing stuff off of MapQuest and drawing lines on it and putting the dome light on in my car and driving around in the hinterlands, in the dark of night in rural Pennsylvania, stopping at gas stations going, am I going in the right direction? And it was like all of a sudden in the course of a year, I had 100 uncles. It was the craziest thing, but such a good, reassuring, warm feeling of being just very abruptly part of a huge community. Felt terrific. I don't know that I could ask for much more.
Yeah. And that kind of leads us back to, what I was saying earlier about, first of all, the strength in the community, and then also, being part of something that you feel is much bigger than yourself. And I think, especially when we're talking about a purpose or a goal or something, a vision for yourself, I think that, having that connection to this thing being bigger than yourself is really going to help you when that path along that thing gets difficult, because it helps you sort of maintain the consistency in the direction in that path. If you see if it's bigger than you, if what you're connected to is much bigger than you, it's like maybe you're, the uncomfort or the discomfort or the inconvenience in the moment is not ideal, but it's attached to something much bigger than you. And so you can still pursue that thing. And that's at least in the pursuing goals and purpose and vision. I see the application there, which of course is a real world example of what we're talking about how the Freemasonry, you learn these lessons and then you apply them to the real world.
But
Do you
if you'll
have?
forgive me, I should explain that also what I described there is also just a matter of scale. So
Hmm,
the story that anecdote that I just told you was about my early days in the fraternity, which you're dating back to 2006, 19
okay.
years ago. So if you continue to take advantage of the opportunities that are afforded you within the fraternity, and you travel to your Grand Lodge to see hundreds of Freemasons together from all over your state, or you go to an event like Masonic Week that takes place in Virginia, where they bring together guys from all over the US and various countries, you start to get a better sense of the scale of the fraternity. That, yes, all Freemasonry is local. So there's the four walls of your lodge and the 15 or 20 guys that you see every month. But then you also start to recognize that it genuinely is a global fraternity, and that you could show up in another city in another part of the world and have somebody who's ready to call you brother. That's pretty special too.
Hmm, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Do Do you have a social media or website or anything you want to promote while you're here or share with us?
I do.
It could
I
be,
do.
yeah,
If you are looking for me and where I will be making speaking appearances or other podcasts on which I might appear, I can't fathom it going any better than this conversation with Cody. But you would find me on Facebook at Austin R Shifrin, author. I have a separate profile that's my personal stuff, and then I have a profile that's my author stuff, and that's where I keep more of a public presence about what appearances I'm making and other things I'm doing.
okay, okay. So, and you mentioned a book. Is your book on Amazon or like
Not
your
one, but
articles or anything?
two.
Okay,
So I'll be happy to send you links to make it any easier for people to find
for
these.
sure.
The
Yep.
first book that I put out 3 years ago is called More Light, Collected Masonic Writings, 2017 to 2021. And the book that I put out, just last year, is called Black Ink, Farther Stars, an explanation for the title of which you can find in the introduction.
Okay.
Those are both available at Amazon, and I will be happy to send you some links so that you can also share that out with the audience in case they're interested.
Perfect. So one thing that I ask everybody before we close, and this could be something from your personal life, if you're comfortable sharing it, or your experience in Freemasonry, or your career, what do you think is one of the most valuable lessons you've ever learned?
Um, the most valuable lesson that I've learned uh, is that, and this does not derive exclusively from Freemasonry. You'll also hear this from there's a leadership teacher by the name of John C. Maxwell, and
Mm, yep.
this notion that real power resides in what you can do to help lift up and build up others. And it dovetails with our concepts in Freemasonry. So I firmly believe that the most important way I can manifest my skills and abilities is what I can do to help build up other people.
Hmm. Yeah. I love that, man. And I think when we were talking about earlier about one of our responsibilities as men is to help men and build up other men that are in spaces similar to us. I think that's like a direct, alignment with that. I think that when you do build up people in these spaces, I think that is what makes men that the word men, the plural word men, multiple men, that is what makes the collective level is all of us doing that. And I think that's very important, for that. And like I mentioned earlier too, a lot of men do not have this sort of leadership or this sort of guidance in their life. And I think that's a huge, I want to say it's unfortunate, but there's been a lot of men who have come out of those spaces and made that a very positive experience for both themselves and for people around them. And, you mentioned the word leadership, and I think that's incredible because I think leadership is essentially being vulnerable to the point to where you can improve other people's lives because of, it's crazy that we think about leadership as something that's like a leader is someone who's like, got it all figured out and they're very competent. And that person, we can follow them. But it's like the best leaders, man, they're there because they were at one time, not that person. For example, if you have a business or if you're in the business space, one thing I think to one of the best ways to be a competent leader is to have those failures that you learn from, and then you can sort of improve yourself and your team because of that. And I think that people around you, whether it's family or friends or professional, your professional team, I think they respect you more when they see that you are authentic in that way, and that when you are sort of true to yourself in that way. And I don't know. I think humility, I think pride can be very dangerous for men. And I think you mentioned earlier about the mental health stuff. I think for a long time, men have been told that, you know, sort of being aware of your mental health or taking care of your mental health is in some way a weakness. But I think I think that's our response. One of our big responsibilities as men is to take care of that mental health so that we can then take care of other people. And I think again, not to sound so cliche, it sounds very cliche, but it's actually very simple. I think it starts with the individual. I think it starts with the person.
Yeah. I mean, even the therapist knows that they have to take care of themselves in order to have the capacity to take care of others, right? Mm-hmm. So as men, if we think that we have any responsibility whatsoever to take care of others, in order to be capable and present for that, we should start by also trying to take good care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's right. And I also think a very important distinction of that is, like, in order to be that person, you sort of have to step out of your comfort zone, whatever that is for you. You have to sort of put yourself in places where you are going to grow as an individual. And for some people, that's a career. You learn things through your career. For some people, it's spaces like martial arts or the gym or fitness. For some people, it's places like Freemasonry, where you're surrounded by people who sort of encourage and maybe sort of push you in the direction of that growth. I think I think that's just, we just have to do that. We have to do that to evolve and to ultimately help the people that are around us.
Sounds to me like you got the idea.
Well, I don't know about that, but I will say it's a continuous process. It's not one of those things that, you're going to improve yourself and then you can just kind of hang out. I do think it's an ongoing thing, throughout our life. I think the quote is something along the lines of, if you look at the world the same way at 40 that you did at 20, you wasted 20 years of your life, or something along those lines. And so I do think it is a never-ending process. And man, with the world that we live in today, it is definitely a never-ending process because things are changing so quickly. We got the internet, and there's AI involved, and there's just like, we had COVID for 4 years or whatever it was, and it's just like so much is changing. And so I think I say all the time that I think adaptability is a huge skill for businesses, for one, but I think also to all of us on the personal and professional level. But listen, man, it's been great talking to you. Been great conversation.
Cody, it has been absolutely my pleasure. I hope it turns out to be of interest to your listeners as well. It's been terrific talking with you.
Hey guys, I really appreciate everybody tuning in today. If you found this content or this episode useful and intriguing, you can visit us on social media. This is Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Rumble, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Apple and Google Podcasts. Pure Wisdom Podcast on all social medias. You can interact with us, follow, like, and share there, and we will see you guys next time.